Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you'd like to submit a story, feel free to do so in the comments down below, or send it to my email. Alright, let's dive into today's story now. It started with a selfie. Just one harmless selfie. I hadn't slept for 2 days straight, caught up in a cycle of late-night gaming sessions and endless doom scrolling on my phone. That morning, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head, hoping some fresh air might shake me out of my stupor. By late afternoon, I found myself at the park, sitting on a bench with my brain running on fumes. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. It was the kind of sunset that practically begged to be photographed, so I figured, why not? I flipped the camera to selfie mode, tilted my head just right to catch the perfect angle, and snapped a picture. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It was just another photo for my collection, one I'd probably never look at again. But later that night, as I lay in bed scrolling through my gallery, I noticed something. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible behind me, was a woman. At first I thought it was just someone walking by, a random stranger who'd wandered into the shot. But the more I stared at it, the stranger it seemed. She wasn't just in the background, she was staring directly at the camera. Her face was pale, almost unnaturally so, with a waxy sheen that made her look disturbingly like a corpse. Her eyes, there was something off about them. They were wide and unblinking, as if she'd been caught in the middle of some awful realization. And her expression, it was blank, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of blankness that felt hollow, lifeless. It sent a chill down my spine. I zoomed in, trying to get a better look. Her features were sharp but blurred at the edges, almost as if there was something subtly wrong with her presence, like she didn't quite fit into the world around her. Her hair was dark and stringy, hanging limply around her face, clinging to the pale skin as if it were wet. She wore a plain, light-colored dress that looked dated, like something from a thrift store's forgotten corner. The more I studied her, the less she looked like a regular person. There was something deeply unsettling about her appearance, like she was caught halfway between life and death. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, or maybe some weird glitch in the photo. I set my phone down and tried to forget about it, but the image of her corpse-like lifeless face lingered in my mind long after I'd turned out the lights. Later that day, still running on empty, I found myself flipping through the photos I had taken throughout the day. It was an impulsive decision, born out of boredom and the strange pull that nagged at the edges of my mind. At first, nothing seemed out of place, just the usual shots of me at the park, in the coffee shop, and messing around in my friend's backyard. But as I scrolled further, my heart began to race. There she was, not in the corner of every photo, but scattered, sometimes subtle, other times glaringly obvious. In one photo, she stood partially obscured by a tree behind me at the park, her face just visible between the branches. In another, she appeared in the coffee shop's window reflection, seated at a table that should have been empty. The worst was the one taken in my friend's backyard. She was faintly visible in the shadow on the fence, her pale face blending unnaturally with the dim light. Always the same lifeless stare, the corpse-like pallor, the dark, stringy hair clinging to her face as though it was wet. But the worst part was her eyes. In every shot, she wasn't just there. She was looking directly at the camera. Her gaze pierced through the screen, as if she was fully aware of me scrolling through the images. It felt like she was watching me, even now. It was unnerving to see her face so clearly in moments where she shouldn't exist. I felt a sick, sinking feeling in my gut. My mind scrambled for explanations. At first, I thought it must be some sort of joke, a stupid prank someone was playing on me. Maybe some glitch in my camera app or, I don't know, a viral filter I'd unknowingly applied. Anything to make sense of it. But the more I looked, the sicker I felt. She wasn't just there. She was in every photo, no matter where I was or what I was doing. It was like she'd been following me all along. My hands were trembling by the time I told Siri to delete every photo. "Delete all photos from today," I said, my voice cracking. As I watched the gallery empty, photo after photo vanishing into nothingness, I let out a shaky breath. I tried to convince myself it was over. The photos were gone. The problem was solved. The unease lingered, wrapping itself around me like a cold, heavy blanket. Her face, those eyes, they were burned into my mind, etched there like a shadow I couldn't escape. That evening, as I was sitting on my couch trying to make sense of the day's events, my buddy Mark called me up. "Hey man, there's a party at Matt's place tonight. Could you bring your speaker? We'll need it for the music, and you should come too." I hesitated. I hadn't slept properly in days and my nerves were shot. My mind kept replaying the strange photos, even though I'd deleted them earlier. I wasn't sure I could handle being around people, but Mark wouldn't take no for an answer. "You've been cooped up for too long," he said. "You need to get out of your head." "Come on, it'll be fun." Reluctantly, I agreed. Maybe he was right. Maybe a night out was exactly what I needed to clear my mind. I told myself it wouldn't be so bad. I sat on the edge of my bed after hanging up, trying to muster the energy to get ready. My hands felt heavy and my thoughts were sluggish. But I forced myself to throw on a clean shirt and head out. The night air was crisp and quiet, a sharp contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. By the time I arrived at Matt's place, the party was in full swing. The music was deafening, and the smell of beer and sweat hit me the moment I walked through the door. People were packed into every corner, laughing and shouting over the bass-heavy playlist. Mark spotted me almost immediately and weaved through the crowd to greet me, a grin plastered across his face. "Glad you made it, man. You look like you could use this," he said, shoving a drink into my hand. I took a sip and tried to relax, letting the noise and energy of the crowd wash over me. But it didn't help. The feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. My eyes darted around the room, scanning faces, but there was nothing unusual, just a blur of tipsy strangers having a good time. I turned back to Mark, determined to tell him about the photos. "Listen, man, something weird happened today," I began. He raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I told him everything. The selfies, the woman in the background, the way she stared directly at the camera. As I spoke, his expression shifted from amused to concerned. "Dude," he said after a moment, "you're probably just sleep deprived. You've been pushing yourself too hard. Your brain's playing tricks on you. Get some rest, and I promise you'll realize it was nothing." I wanted to believe him. I really did. After a while at the party, Mark pulled me aside, looking slightly annoyed. "Wait, did you bring the speaker?" he asked. I'd completely forgotten about it. "Oh man," I stammered, running a hand through my hair. "I left it at home. I can go grab it now." Mark frowned but nodded. "Yeah, we need it. The music's dying. It'll just take a minute, right?" I paused, glancing at the beer in my hand, then handed it back to Mark. You're right, but I'm not driving like this. I'll just walk. It's not far. Mark rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Fine, just hurry back. The vibe here's already fading. The night air was cool as I set off toward home, the quiet streets a stark contrast to the chaotic party I'd just left. My exhaustion weighed heavy on me, but the walk helped clear my head. By the time I reached my house, a sense of dread had begun creeping in. The speaker was in the basement, a space I hated going into even during the day. The faint, musty smell hit me as soon as I opened the basement door. The damp chill and oppressive silence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The single bulb that usually lit the room had burned out weeks ago, and I'd been too lazy to replace it. Still, I told myself it would just take a minute. Grabbing a small desk lamp for light, I made my way down the creaking stairs. With a deep breath, I set the lamp down on a crate and scanned the room. My eyes darted around nervously, searching for the speaker. Finally, I spotted it. It was in the far corner, half hidden under a pile of old clothes. I walked over. The air felt heavier with every step, and the overwhelming sense of unease pressed harder on me. As I reached for the speaker, a chill ran down my spine, freezing me in place. It wasn't just the cold of the basement. It felt like someone was there. I held my breath and scanned the room again, my eyes flitting nervously between the shifting shadows. The lamp's light seemed weaker now, as if it too was afraid of this place. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to bend down and grab the speaker. Just grab it and go, I muttered under my breath. My voice sounded shaky, weak against the oppressive silence of the room. Clutching the speaker tightly, I turned to leave. And then I saw her. She was standing at the foot of the stairs. Her dark, stringy hair clung to her face, the edges dripping as if she'd just emerged from water. Her eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, unwavering. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. This couldn't be real. She couldn't be real. My breath hitched as I took a step back. She remained perfectly still, her body unnaturally rigid, as though she wasn't entirely human. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like my chest would burst. My legs felt like lead, frozen in place. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only watch as she slowly began to move forward, her steps eerily smooth and deliberate, her eyes never leaving mine. At first I noticed something strange. She seemed shorter than me, her head just level with my chest. But as she drew closer, her height shifted subtly, unnervingly. By the time she stood face to face with me, only an inch away, she was taller, her hollow, lifeless eyes staring down at me. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my body felt paralyzed under her gaze. Then, without warning, her mouth stretched open in a way that defied logic, impossibly wide, as though her jaw was dislocating. At the same time, her eyes widened grotesquely, and her head began shaking violently from side to side, faster and faster, the motion blurring her features. A wave of terror surged through me, and suddenly, my body snapped into action. Without thinking, I shoved past her with all my strength and bolted for the stairs. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to escape. My legs pumped furiously as I raced up the stairs, the oppressive weight of her presence bearing down on me as though she were right behind me. Bursting out of the basement, I didn't stop running. I tore through the house, out the front door and into the cool night air. My chest heaved and my mind screamed at me to keep moving. I sprinted all the way back to the party, my heart pounding louder than the music as I pushed through the front door, gasping for breath. Back at the party, I stumbled into the living room, my lungs burning and my legs trembling. Mark turned to me, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern the moment he saw my face. "What the hell happened?" he asked, grabbing my shoulder. I could barely form words. I saw her," I managed to choke out. "She was in the basement. My voice cracked, and I shook my head, unable to finish the sentence. Mark's brow furrowed, his tone skeptical but worried. "Who are you talking about? Dude, are you okay? You're not making any sense." I grabbed his arm. "You don't understand. She was there. She's real. I saw her." Mark exchanged a glance with a couple of our friends nearby, who were now watching with confused expressions. "You've been pushing yourself too hard," Mark said. "You're sleep-deprived, man. You're probably hallucinating." "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "This wasn't in my head. She was real. I could feel her presence." I shuddered, the memory of her lifeless eyes and grotesque movements flashing through my mind. Mark sighed, clearly unsure of what to say. "Look, why don't you crash here tonight? Forget about the speaker. We'll figure it out tomorrow." I nodded weakly, the adrenaline fading and leaving me drained. Staying in the house, that house, wasn't an option. As I sat down on the couch, my mind raced with questions. Who was she? What did she want? And why was she in my basement? Even surrounded by people, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe. The party noise faded into the background as my thoughts spiraled. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be haunted. I stayed at Mark's place that night, but sleep was a distant hope. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling while muffled party sounds continued into the early hours. My mind replayed the events in the basement, the way her height shifted, her inhuman stillness, and the horrifying moment her features distorted into something beyond comprehension. Mark tried to reassure me that it was all in my head, a product of exhaustion and too many sleepless nights. "You've been pushing yourself too hard," he said. "You're not crazy, but you're overtired. Your mind's messing with you." At first, I refused to accept it. That woman, or whatever she was, wasn't just a hallucination. She had weight, presence. The air itself felt suffocating in her proximity. And those eyes, lifeless yet filled with malice, they weren't something I could have imagined. I couldn't shake the memory, no matter how hard I tried. The first few nights at Mark's were torture. Every sound, a creak, a whisper of wind against the windows, made me jump. I lay awake for hours, half expecting to see her face in the shadows. When I did sleep, I was haunted by nightmares. In them, I was back in the basement, trapped with her towering over me, her unblinking eyes boring into my soul. Mark was patient, though I could see the worry on his face. He tried to distract me, pulling me into conversations about work, school, or old memories. Sometimes it helped, even if only for a little while. By the end of the first week, I was still restless, but I wasn't as jumpy. The constant fear that she was watching me began to fade, replaced by a numb exhaustion. My dreams, while still vivid, weren't as terrifying, and I started to convince myself that maybe Mark was right. As the days turned into weeks, my confidence grew. Mark and I laughed more, and I started to feel like myself again. I even slept through the night a couple of times. It felt like waking up from a long nightmare. Every day that passed without seeing her made it easier to believe she wasn't real. She couldn't be. It was the only explanation that made sense. On the 29th day, I woke up feeling like I had turned a corner. I sat at Mark's kitchen table, sipping my coffee and watching the sunlight stream through the window. The memories of that night in the basement seemed distant, like something I dreamed up in a state of delirium. It had to be sleep deprivation, I said aloud, more to myself than to Mark. He glanced up from his phone, raising an eyebrow. "You think so?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, nodding firmly. "It makes sense, doesn't it? I hadn't slept for 2 days. My brain was fried. I probably imagined the whole thing." Mark didn't argue. Instead, he gave me a small, encouraging smile. "If you believe that, then good. Maybe you can finally put it behind you." I smiled back, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time, I believed I could move on. The fear that had gripped me for so long was gone. It was time to go home. The drive back to my house felt surreal. Mark had offered to come with me, but I declined. I didn't need him to hold my hand anymore. It was the 29th day since I'd left, and I was ready to reclaim my space and move on from the nightmare I'd convinced myself had only been in my head. The logical part of my brain told me that it was time to face my fears and find closure. Pulling into the driveway, I was struck by how ordinary the house looked. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. It felt almost welcoming. Almost. I stepped inside, and the familiar creak of the floorboards greeted me. Dust motes floated in the evening light streaming through the windows. Everything was just as I'd left it. The kitchen sink was still filled with unwashed dishes, and the stack of mail by the door remained untouched. It was as if time had stood still in my absence. The house was a mess. For hours, I busied myself with cleaning and tidying. Dishes piled high in the sink, unopened letters scattered across the counter, and dust coating nearly every surface. Restoring order to the chaos felt therapeutic, as if I was exorcising the lingering dread that had taken root in my mind. By the time night fell, the house felt less oppressive. I settled onto the couch with a sense of accomplishment and relief. But then I remembered something. After you delete photos on your phone, they're not gone immediately. They're sent to a folder called Recently Deleted, where they linger for 30 days before disappearing for good. A knot of unease formed in my stomach as the thought crossed my mind. It had been 29 days since that night. The photos would still be there. Curiosity got the better of me. Pulling out my phone, I navigated to the folder and opened it. At first, I only saw the usual: blurry shots, accidental screenshots, and the random junk I deleted over the last month. But then, I reached the selfies from that day. I scrolled through the photos, expecting to see her again, that pale, lifeless figure staring out from the shadows. But photo after photo showed only me, just me. No woman, no eerie figure in the background. Relief flooded through me, and I laughed nervously. "I'm such an idiot," I muttered to myself. But then I reached the last photo. She was there. This time, she wasn't in the background or the corner. She was front and center, staring directly into the camera. Her waxy, corpse-like skin seemed even more decayed than I remembered. Her dark, stringy hair framing her face like a shroud. Her lifeless eyes bore into mine, and for a moment, I felt as if she could see me through the screen. My hand trembled as the realization hit me. She wasn't in the photos. She had never been in the photos. It was her reflection. She had been standing behind me the entire time.